The Newman crew arrived at New Hampstead in July 1944. Replacements fed into the pipeline. Their aircraft was an old B-17 named Witka Tankatone, a Sioux phrase meaning the bird that lays big eggs. During a training takeoff, a farmer's tractor crossed the runway. The plane clipped it, careened into a grove of trees, and caught fire. Waist gunner Mackenzie was badly burned and spent the rest of the war in the hospital. The rest scrambled out as the ammo cooked off. For pilot Herb Newman, co-pilot Paul Deininger, and navigator Dean Whitaker, it was a first lesson. The ground could kill you before you ever saw the enemy. On the morning of August 8th, the operations officer called them to the tent. It would be a milk run to Caen, supporting ground troops. A milk run meant light opposition, or so they believed. At 14,000 feet, flak began to claw at the formation. Deininger felt a piece strike his flying boot. Whitaker saw a hole open in the aluminum skin beside his gun. The squadron commander's plane was hit and went down in flames. They landed with a feathered engine and no hydraulic fluid. The long return gave them time to think. Combat was nothing like the training pamphlets promised by September. The 8th Air Force was doing more than bombing. Patton's Third Army had outrun its supply lines, starving for gasoline. The 96th Bomb Wing converted B-24s into flying tankers. A radio operator with the 466 Bomb Group recalled flying with a skeleton crew of 5, no guns, and the bomb bay crammed with 5-gallon cans. They landed on bombed-out Luftwaffe strips, unloaded the fuel, and took off again. There was no smoking on board. The fumes were volatile, the risk was enormous, but the gas kept Patton moving. In mid-September, Operation Market Garden began. Heavy bombers were used to drop supplies to paratroopers. For pilot Bill Lindley of the 95th Bomb Group, the mission meant flying at low altitude with General Matthew Ridgway aboard, providing close support to the airborne troops. For Manny Abrams, a navigator with the 392nd, the route was flown at 500 feet, using a road map instead of aeronautical charts. Dutch farmers stared as the bombers thundered overhead. German soldiers fired from church steeples. Harry Reynolds, a bombardier on the B-24, the Hot Rock with the 491st Bomb Group, watched his squadron leader hit and crash. He dropped his supplies at 400 feet and climbed away. These low-level operations exposed the big bombers to small arms fire and flak. The casualty rate was brutal, but the drops went through. Despite the damage, Reynolds and his crew made it back to base. For the new fighter pilots, the shock of real combat came in late September. Jim McCubbin, of the 364th Fighter Group, flew his first mission on the wing of the group commander, call sign Outshine. Over the Dutch coast, flak puffs appeared. Then, over the bomber stream, a thin cloud layer hid the enemy. When the fighters turned, a mass of FW-190Os dropped from the overcast. McCubbin watched a whole B-17 formation turn into a junkyard of burning planes and parachutes. Outshine fired on a lone German, and McCubbin added his own burst until the pilot bailed out. He was elated, but the sight of those falling bombers never left him. Wayne Gatlin, 18 years old, had joined the 356 Fighter Group after months of training in P-47s, and then P-51s. On his first mission over Germany, the weather was clear, the formation tight. But on the return, he pulled ahead of his flight, peeled off, and flew alone toward Germany. He had gone hypoxic. He lost altitude and came to his senses over friendly territory. He tightened his mask and climbed into the contrails of the bombers. The enemy had not attacked him. The cold, thin air had nearly killed him instead. Training had warned about oxygen, but knowing and feeling were different things. Charles Macaulay had earned his wings the hard way, a farm boy who taught himself engines through a correspondence course. On October 6th, he took his own crew to Berlin for the first time. The formation numbered over 1,000 bombers. As they approached the initial point, the 385th Bomb Group's lead squadron ran into trouble. The high squadron overshot the turn and ended up 15 miles behind the main stream alone. 75 German fighters fell on them. Macaulay watched from the right wing as 11 B-17s were shot out of the sky. Not one of them was from his own squadron. The destruction happened in minutes. He thought little of it at the time. It was not his plane going down. Back at Great Ashfield, Macaulay learned the truth. The shot-down squadron was the 549th, part of his own 385th Bomb Group. Friends were gone. The randomness of survival was stark. His crew had been untouched, but they had seen the worst the Luftwaffe could do. They had also seen how a single navigational mistake, an overshot turn, could seal a formation's fate. For these newcomers, cohesion and adaptability were not just words. They were the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic. The baptism had been harsh, but they were still in the air. The 351st Bomb Group approached the synthetic oil plant at Pölitz on the morning of October 7th. This was Jim Wilson's 28th mission, and the waist gunner had seen enough flak to know a bad setup when he felt one. The formation began its bomb run, then aborted for reasons that were never clear. The leaders ordered a 360-degree turn, an agonizing maneuver that kept the B-17s over the guns for minutes longer than any crew wanted. The German batteries did not waste the gift. 270 of their heavy 88s and 105s had the range dialed by the second pass. Wilson watched a B-17 on his wing take hits, fuel streaming from a ruptured tank. He saw his old pilot, Einar Peterson, lose 2 engines and begin a desperate glide towards Sweden. The tail gunner and 1 other survived that crash. Most of the rest did not leave the plane. The 351st lost 17 bombers that day. Wilson's own ship came home with more than 200 holes punched through its skin. He walked onto the left wing after landing and pulled a piece of flak loose from the metal with his bare hand. Later that night, he packed Peterson's belongings for shipment home. It was the kind of mechanical, sorrowful task that combat crews learn to do without thinking, because thinking about it too long would break a man. On November 2nd, the 8th Air Force launched a maximum effort against the synthetic oil plant at Merseburg. The Newman crew flew their B-17 Knockout as tail-end Charlie at 24,000 feet, the most exposed position in the formation. The flak over the target was the worst bombardier Dean Whitaker had ever seen, a solid black carpet of exploding shells that stretched from the initial point all the way to the release line. They made it through the bomb run, but the trouble was just beginning. A swarm of German fighters hit the formation as it turned for home. A 20-millimeter cannon shell tore through the Astrodome, and the cockpit instruments popped out of the panel. Tail gunner Bill Jones was killed instantly by a direct hit. The plane went into a steep, uncontrolled dive. Co-pilot Paul Deininger yelled to Newman that they had to get out. He lowered the landing gear to signal surrender, then gave the order to bail out. 8 men bailed out of the crippled B-17 before it exploded. Deininger, Whitaker, Sergeant Arnold Money, and Sergeant Cornelius Harrington landed in separate fields and were taken prisoner by German soldiers. But pilot Herb Newman, radio operator Melvin Cohen, and gunners Leroy Kucharski and Anthony Perry came down near the town of Poleben. No soldiers were there. A mob of Nazi party members, including the local police chief, fell upon them with clubs, knives, and guns. The 4 dead airmen were buried in paper bags, along with the remains of Bill Jones, which were recovered from the wreckage of Knockout. The war had shown its ugliest face. On November 25th, waist gunner Willard Richards climbed aboard the B-17 Honky Tonk Sal. She was a veteran of 87 raids with the 385th Bomb Group. The target was Merseburg, the synthetic oil plant that drew flak like no other. The German gunners found their range before the formation reached the initial point. 1 shell tore through the right wing and ruptured a fuel tank. Gasoline streamed into the slipstream, ignited by the hot exhaust. Richards called for a crew check. The radio operator, Joe Kolazinski, did not answer. Richards disconnected his own oxygen and crawled forward. He found Kolazinski on the floor, gasping, his oxygen hose shot clean through by flak. Richards grabbed a hose from the other side of the radio room and hooked it up. Kolazinski's body quieted. Then Richards' own walk-around bottle ran dry. He collapsed backward through the door into the ball turret frame. Crewmates Jerry Mangan and Kolazinski, now revived, tore up floorboards to free him. Richards came back pale and gasping, but alive. By December 16th, the war on the ground had taken a sudden turn. German panzer divisions smashed into the American lines in the Ardennes, creating a bulge 40 miles deep. The 8th Air Force could not respond. Fog as thick as smoke rolled in over England and sat there day after day. Ice crusted the windows and the runway lights. Pilots like Lewis Smith of the 385th Bomb Group wrote in their diaries that the fog was so heavy you could not see 50 feet. They read the news from the front and waited. On December 24th, the fog lifted as suddenly as it had come. The 8th Air Force launched everything it had. Nearly 2,000 bombers and 800 fighters rose into a clear winter sky to smash the German rear areas. General Frederick Castle flew in the co-pilot's seat of the lead ship with the 4th Combat Wing. His group arrived 15 minutes late over the target, and the Luftwaffe was waiting. Me-109s fell out of the sun and hit the lead formation. Castle's plane took a hit in the engine. 2 engines began to burn over the intercom. Castle ordered the crew to bail out. He lowered the landing gear to slow the plane. When the right-wing tank exploded, Castle was still at the controls. He did not survive. That same day, fighter pilot Jim McCubbin of the 364th Fighter Group found himself in trouble on the ground, not in the air. He and his operations officer had flown to France for a visit. When they tried to return, fog had closed every field in England. They reversed course, low on fuel and unable to raise any airfield on the radio. As the sun set, McCubbin spotted a dark strip that looked like a runway. On his 4th attempt, his P-51 touched down and lurched into a bomb crater. The wings spanned the hole and held the plane suspended. He had landed on a wrecked German airfield. For fighter pilot Wayne Gatlin of the 356th Fighter Group, the ultimate prize came in early April 1945. He was leading a flight of Mustangs escorting bombers near Berlin when he spotted a jet making a pass on a damaged B-17. Gatlin cut the Me-262 off in a dive and opened fire at 200 yards. He watched his rounds hit the fuselage as the jet pulled into a vertical dive. He followed until the jet plowed into the ground. No parachute appeared. It was Gatlin's first jet kill and one of the last air-to-air victories of the war in Europe. The Luftwaffe was finished, but the fight was not yet over. Earlier that same winter, in February of 1945, the 8th Air Force was striking deeper into Germany than ever before. On February 3rd, more than 1,000 B-17s and B-24s climbed over the North Sea, their target the heart of Berlin. The city's flak batteries had been reinforced. The sky ahead turned black with exploding shells. Crews reported that the flak was the worst they had ever seen. One bomber's bomb bay doors jammed, and only half its bombs released over the aiming point. The formation was already breaking up from the barrage when the first jets appeared, slashing through the bomber's stream at speeds that left the gunners no time to track them. On February 14th, the bombers flew another mission, this time without the heavy flak that had punished them over Berlin. From 35,000 feet, the city looked clean, untouched. The bombs fell in long sticks, and the smoke rose until it flattened against the upper atmosphere. Many crews remembered it as an easy mission. No fighters, little flak, but on the ground, the firestorm consumed the old city, and the death toll climbed into the tens of thousands. The debate over whether the target was military or civilian would outlast the war itself. The Me-262 jet fighter had become a daily threat. Earlier in the war, a bomber crew that survived the flak could expect a quiet ride home. Now, even as the Luftwaffe ran short of fuel and pilots, those who still flew relied on speed. The jets could climb faster, dive faster, and outrun any American escort. For the crews of the 385th Bomb Group, the jets appeared without warning, fired their cannon, and were gone before the gunners could swing their turrets. The psychological weight of that speed was as heavy as the flak. Men began to look over their shoulders in a new way, knowing that death could come from a direction they could not see until it was too late. Fighter pilot Jim McCubbin of the 364th Fighter Group had returned to his squadron after his forced Christmas Eve landing in France. By March, he was flying regular missions again, hunting for targets on the ground as well as in the air. On March 18th, he led a flight on a strafing sweep near Berlin. The clouds were thick, and the group had to descend to find any opening. Below them, McCubbin spotted 3 trains in a small area. He directed his element leader to hit the first train while he lined up his own run on the locomotive. At 200 yards, he opened fire, his armor-piercing incendiary rounds stitching the engine. He pulled up and saw his wingman Barry continue straight ahead at low altitude. Barry radioed that he had been hit. McCubbin inspected his wingman's plane, but could see no damage. Barry said he could not make it back. Seconds later, Barry jettisoned his canopy, rolled the plane over, and crashed into the ground. McCubbin was alone now and angry. He decided to stay low and follow the main rail line west, hunting for more targets. He found a large marshalling yard, but a flak car hidden at the end of the train opened up. A shell tore a 2-foot hole through his right wing. The instruments went dead. The coolant temperature climbed, and the oil pressure dropped. McCubbin knew his engine was burning up. He climbed into the overcast, but vertigo took him. He broke out, heading for the ground, corrected, and found himself flying just above the clouds. The engine was losing power. He called his squadron leader on the radio, said his goodbyes, and prepared to bail out. The plane kept trying to roll as he released the stick, so he jumped straight up from the seat. He pulled the ripcord and the chute opened just in time. He landed hard in a marsh, saving his legs. A crowd of civilians and Home Guard soldiers surrounded him. A boy who spoke broken English told the crowd what the Americans had done. Then a German army major arrived, took custody of McCubbin, and began the interrogation that would lead him to a prisoner of war camp. While McCubbin began his captivity, the bomber crews pushed on. Lewis Smith, a first pilot with the 385th Bomb Group, had flown his 34th mission in early April. He was a veteran now, one of the few left from his original barracks. On April 7th, he rose from his bunk at Great Ashfield for what would be his last combat mission. The target was somewhere in central Germany, and the briefing warned of heavy fighter opposition. As the bomber stream crossed into German territory, the radio crackled with a report of bandits in the area. Within minutes, Me-109s and FW-190Os were hitting the formation from all angles. Then the jets came. 3 Me-262s dove straight down through the formation, knocking one B-17 out. The plane recovered, and 7 or 8 parachutes appeared before it hit the ground and exploded. Smith's tail gunner called that a 109 was right behind them, winking its cannon. Smith felt the slugs thudding into his fuselage. The gunners fired back, and the 109 broke into flames 200 yards off the tail, diving into the number 4 man flying below. Both planes blew up. The concussion rocked Smith's B-17. He held his course through the bomb run, released his ordnance, and then turned for home. The trip back was quiet. He crossed the Belgian coast at 500 feet alone and landed the Gypsy Princess on the runway at Great Ashfield. He shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit, glad to be alive. Smith had finished his tour. He did not have to fly another mission. But the war was not over for everyone. At the 398th Bomb Group base at Newthampstead, a new crew had just arrived, replacing the men lost in November. Among them was radio operator Paul Krupp, a 28-year-old from Cleveland. Krupp had trained on B-17s and had flown his first missions in March. On April 10th, his crew was scheduled to attack the airfield at Oranienburg, near Berlin. The bomb run was routine until an Me-262 appeared from nowhere. Its cannon shells tore through the left waist, opening a hole the size of a truck. The waist gunner, Felix Tichenor, lost his left leg and arm. The oxygen and electrical systems were shot out. Krupp made his way to the cockpit to report the damage, but the intercom was dead. He turned back toward the radio room. As he crossed the catwalk in the bomb bay, the jet hit them again. Number 3 engine caught fire, and flames poured into the bomb bay. Krupp reached the radio room just as another explosion ripped through the plane. The floor gave way, the walls caved in, and he was pinned underneath the wreckage. He thought it was over. Then the plane leveled off, and he crawled out. He grabbed his parachute and saw the ball turret gunner, Haskell Boyce, diving out the waist door, his left arm blown off at the elbow. Krupp looked back at Tichenor, who was lying on the deck, badly wounded and unable to move. Tichenor waved him away. Krupp jumped. His chute opened, and he looked up to see 4 other chutes in the sky behind him. Seconds later, his B-17 exploded. He floated down through the cold air, the anoxia receding from his mind when he hit the ground. A German lieutenant from the Wehrmacht found him first. A crowd of angry civilians approached, but the lieutenant chased them away. Krupp's face was burned, his nerves raw, but he was alive. He was taken to a first aid station where he found Haskell Boyce again, pale from blood loss. The war would end within the month. Krupp would be moved to a prisoner of war camp and liberated not long after, one of only 6 survivors from the crew of 10. In early May, the war in Europe came to a close. The 8th Air Force stood down across Germany. Prisoner of war camps were thrown open. Jim McCubbin, captured on a strafing run near Berlin, was liberated by advancing American troops. Paul Krupp, who had bailed out of a burning B-17 and watched his waist gunner wave him away, was freed from Stalag 3A. Paul Deininger and Dean Whitaker, who had survived the murders of their pilot and 3 crewmates near Merseburg, walked out of captivity. In all, 26,000 airmen of the 8th Air Force never came home, among them Herb Newman, Bill Jones, and General Frederick Castle. In the months that followed, the post-war analysis began. The strategic bombing campaign had not destroyed German production lines, not the way the pre-war theorists promised, but it had broken the Luftwaffe. It had crippled the German fuel supply. It had forced 2 million Germans into air defense and rubble clearance, men and guns that might otherwise have fought on the eastern or western fronts. The airmen who had survived the flak over Merseburg, the fighters over Berlin, and the runs to Dresden knew that victory had a human face. They carried with them the memory of friends who had been shot down, burned, or murdered on the ground. Those who came home rebuilt their lives. Paul Deininger returned to his job at a book manufacturing plant. Dean Whitaker settled in Las Vegas. Lewis Smith earned his optometry degree and practiced in Kansas for 48 years. Wayne Gatlin stayed with the Air Force and retired as a major general. Jim McCubbin went into engineering. Paul Krupp returned to the Cleveland Police Department and served for more than 33 years. Waist gunner Willard Richards returned to Ohio and worked in middle management. Waist gunner Jim Wilson settled in San Antonio. The 8th Air Force became known as the Mighty 8th. Its legacy was written not in strategic theories, but in the courage of young men who climbed into unpressurized bombers at 20,000 feet and flew straight into the flak. Decades later, one of their commanders, Ira Eaker, spoke a simple farewell to his British allies. "We hope that after we're gone," he said, "you'll be glad we came. If you have any family stories from the Second World War, or memories handed down from a father or grandfather who served, we would be grateful to hear them in the comments below." We read every single one. If this documentary has meant something to you, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps us continue telling the stories of the men and women who lived through history. Thank you sincerely for listening.